What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We have an awesome episode today. Something old school. We're going back in time, talking about physical media, especially in the state of DVD collecting and the horror community, and how important some of these releases were back in the day. Where now I feel like we're getting everything multiple times. We're getting steel books. We're getting 4Ks, Blu-rays, different 4Ks, different steelbooks, different slipcovers. Where back then there was a lot of movies that were just so sought after that we could not get other than like things like VHS and maybe even Laserdisc. But for someone like me, Laserdisc wasn't even in my ballpark of anything that I was collecting. I didn't even know where to buy them. But there was a couple movies in the horror genre that people were absolutely clamoring for. And we're going to talk about those today, and not only just talk about them, but we're going to kind of give you the backstory on these releases and how important it was to the community, and just a little bit about behind the scenes when it came to these releases itself. And who better to bring on than someone who was in the mix at the time, and that is CK, aka Wes from the Dead Pit Radio Show. Dude, thanks for coming on tonight.
No problem, man. I love talking about this sort of thing. And like you said, we were in the mix. 2007, 2008, 2009 was a hot period for physical media. Believe it or not, for all you youngsters out there, people were hyped about the movies. That was the thing then. It was the movies, not necessarily the packaging. Special features were cool, commentaries, documentaries, and stuff like that. But a lot of these movies had never seen the light of day since VHS days from that point. So it was a big deal to see them digitally and widescreen and everything. And it's almost like a kid on Christmas morning with some of these movies, man, watching them for the first time on DVD.
Yeah, and it was a different realm of the community, right? Like it felt very underground a lot more there, because if you wanted to talk about this stuff, physical media, horror, you were in message boards, right? Like that's where all the dirt was. It wasn't something that you'd see flash on, your feed or something as a big news story. This was kind of more underground talk. I mean, obviously you had the big, news outlets Bloody Disgusting was still around. I mean, Shock Till You Drop was another one that I remember back then. What was another one that was around back then that used to
Ain't
drop?
It Cool News was a huge one around this time period. So they covered a little bit of everything, not just horror genre stuff. Dread Central, I think, was around way back then as well.
Yeah, it was for sure. And you guys were doing your show too at this time, correct?
We were. Yeah, at this point in time, we'd been doing the show. In 2007, it was like a year and a half or so we'd been doing a show. So, one of the movies that we're going to be talking about here was one of our big requests. Anybody that came on from some of these companies, that was like, hey, man, because Monster Squad at this point, I don't know. I'm not going to lead the way, but we can talk about Monster Squad here.
You were, I mean, I was a bystander, right? And I was somebody who was in the mix of we need this. I don't own this movie in my collection at all. I had rented this, but I didn't see this until a little bit later in life, because, as I was getting into horror, people will always ask me, did you see Monster Squad? I'm like, no, which is so odd, because for someone who loved anything horror related, even as a kid, all those gateway movies like The Gate and, even gateway shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark, all this stuff, you would think somebody like me who was watching Goonies every single day, for years would have seen the Monster Squad. But for some reason, I never did. And once I heard about it, I ran out to rent it and I absolutely loved it. But then it became, I cannot find this thing on any kind of physical format. The VHS was long gone at that point. And DVDs, this thing it didn't exist. So I did a little more research and come to find out, everybody wanted this movie. Everybody was like, where is Monster Squad? It's such a classic. Why has nobody put this out yet? And like you said, it was 20, maybe a little less than 20 years since the last physical media release of this movie. So of course people were going pretty crazy for it. And, like I said, I was more of an innocent bystander. You were actually doing something in the genre with the radio show. So you got a lot more words about this stuff than I did. You knew who to talk to. And I think you actually you guys dropped the news, right?
We did. And it was completely on a whim. I mean, we had Don May Jr., who we still interview to this day. We've had him on recently as well. But the first time we had him on was, I think it was January of 2007. And we were rapid firing, some titles, and Monster Squad was one of those. And he kind of clued us in. He's like, "It's coming, guys. We're not." He said, "Synapse isn't releasing it, but I can tell you that it's definitely coming." And everybody got hyped to the max because, like we were saying, up to this point, unless you had that old Vestron VHS, there was a laser disc, but I would imagine that not too many people had that, and that was even more expensive than the VHS at the time. So a lot of people were very, very, very excited about the Monster Squad finally hitting DVD. And you got to remember, at this point in time, DVD wasn't really that new of a format. Been around for almost 10 years at that point. So we waited quite a while for this edition to drop. And man, it wasn't just a bare bones edition either. It was fully loaded.
And that's and I know we still have our copies, because when it comes to me and it comes to, I'm really big on like physical media history, especially in the horror genre. And I always like to keep specific movies that I feel like were a big deal in that horror genre. And this was the rookie. I like to say this, the DVD rookie of the Monster Squad from Lionsgate. And it was this bad boy here. And Lionsgate had this little error that they were doing where they were really trying to take these old movies and almost kind of modernizing them with these covers. And a lot of people didn't really like the covers because it was so different than what we were used to. But I think they were trying to get a newer audience, because Lionsgate at that time was hot, man. Like with all the movies they were releasing in theaters, Lionsgate was everywhere. So they did this little run where they were taking these classics and putting them back out with like some features. And they would always add these slips on it. Like they did one for The Gate. They did one for, American Psycho. They did another one for My Bloody Valentine, where you always got this alternate weird artwork, and it was almost had like that, almost like a reflective look.
What do you think they were going for exactly? Like a Goonies sort of thing, or
with this, or with the idea of the
with that one in particular?
I think they were. I think they were trying to go with a Goonies idea, and I think adding the Universal Monsters, in the back, I think that's really what they were trying to get with people, because again, even the logo is a little bit different than what we're used to. It's very modernized looking.
Right.
And I can see now people, and back then, I don't remember if they hated this or if people were more like, we just want the movie. So this wasn't a real big talk of like how bad this, if this came out now, this would have got shit on probably. But for me, I find a fond memory of this because this was the first edition I ever owned. So to me, this cover art is almost like vintage now, and it brings back a lot of great memories. So I love it, even though it is an ugly artwork than what we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then, some of the hardcores weren't fans of it. The original VHS arts, which this cat will leave me alone here. Showcase again. Everybody loves that. That's like iconic. So, but I mean, at the same time, the physical media game is way different in 2007. So these titles like Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps were physically out in stores everywhere, and people were buying them. Just the regular folks. You didn't have streaming or anything at this point in time. People were still buying these physical copies weekly. So they were selling a lot more, probably 10 to 20 times more than what they're selling now, maybe even more. So I get they're wanting to appeal to a broader audience. You got a younger kids, 14, 15-year-old kid. Oh, this looks kind of cool. It's got some monsters in it, not realizing that it's from the 80s or whatever. So, I mean, I guess looking back on it, I get that. Whereas today, the people that are buying these movies are the most hardcore of hardcores. So they will, promote it as such with the original artwork a lot of the times now. So it was different back then.
Definitely. And I think it was one of those things where you kind of, what's the terminology? Like now it's like we get so much that I think we're a little bit more critical, where back then it was kind of like, you knew this was it. So it was like you made the best of it because it was all we had, right? So there wasn't a lot of options here when it came to specific movies. So like we said, it was more about the movies, because at this point in time, slipcovers for DVDs were not a thing. Like this could have been some of the earlier slipcovers, like around this time, 2007, when they were doing this line that we saw, because they weren't, they weren't around a long time back then. Like they probably only started hitting around the late 2000s, probably.
I mean, I'm trying to think, like, as far as retro titles with the slipcover and everything, I mean, that's one of the first for sure. But I think, were they doing slipcovers for more mainstream movies and stuff like that?
I think that they were, but not even still, like not as much as you'd think, because I'm at my stuff right here and I see slipcovers, but um I don't, nothing like old. Like everything's like, I'm looking now, like there was no slipcovers for American Pie, but there was a slipcover for like Super Bad, right? So like they were
Mhm.
coming out, but it was a little bit like later in the game. And I think like this too, like that little line that they were doing over at Lionsgate, like these slipcovers were kind of a thing. Like Rob Zombie's Halloween had a slipcover. Like, I mean, they were starting to kind of come out, but they weren't, you know, on every single release that was released going forward. It was like they some companies chose like which ones they wanted to add it
I
to.
know that some companies, too, after a title had been out a little while, they would print up a new batch of slipcovers to put over that title to, I guess, give it a fresh look or whatever. It's
Oh
so
yeah. And
bizarre.
Walmart's still notorious for that though. Like
Yeah.
you ever go to Walmart and you're like, oh, look at all these movies with new slipcover. But when you take the slipcover off, it's like, oh, it's the same edition I've had for like 10 years.
Anchor
Like
Bay
they're
did
still
that a lot.
notorious for that.
Back in the day, Anchor Bay did that a lot with like Halloween and Evil Dead and stuff like that. Like every year it would be some sort of, like I know Halloween had something called like the Glowing Eyes edition where it was like a holographic cover and it was
Mhm.
the exact same DVD that they'd been releasing for years.
Yeah, I just grabbed a couple of those. They're called like there's a special name for them. It's almost like if you ever see wrestling figures now, there's a line called like fan favorites or something where there's always the same four guys all the time. Like they never, they're always replenished because they're like the top sellers. Well, I
Right.
think Anchor Bay would do that with their big titles. Like you'd always get like Halloween's, Dawn of the Dead's, like the big ones would always kind of come out and they'd put like a new slip on it, Hellraiser, like because they knew it would sell, and they would just throw an extra slip on it just to kind of almost like it was kind of like their all-star batch of movies they would put out every Halloween to give it another little run or whatever. But when you said, everybody was hyped for Monster Squad and the news kind of leaked accidentally on your show with Don May,
Mhm.
and everybody kind of caught wind of it, you started to hear the rumblings and everybody getting excited. And like you said, I mean, this didn't just come out. This came out in an edition that now would be considered like a Scream Factory collector's edition. But
Oh,
back
for
in
sure.
'07, like Lionsgate put this out. I mean, again, it had the new artwork, it had the slip. You check out the back, this thing is freaking loaded with features, like
Oh, yeah.
loaded. And I know you said what Slippy worked on it, right?
Right. All of the special feet. Well, I don't know if all, but he definitely did like the documentary. It's like a 5-part documentary series, which is great. It may be one of my favorite things that he ever did, was in this, because you got to remember, man, up to this point, you had not heard from any of these people, right?
Mhm.
I think we had interviewed Fred Decker and Andre Gower like the summer of this release on our show. But I mean, the most people had never heard the stories. They didn't know that Brent Challam, who played Horace, had passed away. Like that was breaking news. Like that us hardcores kind of knew about, but for just the common fan to have all this stuff at their disposal, and this was at Walmart and they could pick it up. I think the fan base, this is one of the prime examples where the fan base of this movie just kind of exploded after this DVD release. Like a very small group of people become a large group really quickly because this is
Mhm.
it's a great movie.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it kind of passed me by during the time it was supposed to be in my face, right? And all those years later, and I heard rumblings about it from people who had asked me about it. Do I think it's going to get a DVD soon? I'm chatting with people online, and
Mm.
I had a friend at work talk to me, and he's like, "Oh, do you have Monster Squad?" And I'm like, "No, I don't have it." And he's like, "Oh yeah," he's like, "That was like one of my favorites," and I was like, "Why haven't I seen this?" So that's where I kind of hunted it down. And then sure enough, a couple years later is when this thing was released, probably like it could have been like 7 years later at this point, but this was released and everybody was super excited about it. And like you said, it gained more fans, I think, because then you heard about it all the time. At least I did, and I don't know why I didn't hear about it as much. And maybe that was because it was one of those things, it was lost for so long that kind of people forgot, or people didn't really, it
But
wasn't, top of mind.
and I think too, like the theatrical run back in the day, the marketing sucked for it. Like I don't know if you remember some of the original posters that came out. I
No.
think
Well, I knew that Adidas one or whatever. Was that a fake or is that a real?
now well some of the initial release posters, I think that the one that's famous was like the second run, but they had like wanted posters of the monsters. Like that was the theatrical poster. And it's bad. You would have to look it up. So like people just didn't go see it. Like they didn't know what it was. The marketing sucked behind it and everything. It gained a cult audience on video, but then in 2007, I mean, you gotta think even back what 88, 89, whenever that tape came out. I mean, it was just smaller video stores. They didn't have a massive run of tapes or anything. But for the first time in 2007, like thousands and thousands of people have this movie at their disposal for the very first time. So for sure it's going to gain an audience, but I think Monster Squad is one of those that gained a gigantic audience of people just because of that DVD release.
100%. And I just flipped this thing open really quick, and I mean, what a cool edition. I mean, it comes with the the insert of the original post art. It's got 2 discs in here.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's super cool. I mean, it's again, what's crazy about Monster Squad is it's had a lot of editions since this, where it took this 20 years to kind of get going, but not they weren't done there. A couple of years later, they released the Blu-ray, which is basically just a carbon copy of what we have here, except just the Blu-ray format of this. I don't think there's anything new on here at all. I think it's just upgraded, updated to look at. It's even got, this is not a cool edition, but just got a little bit of a HD uptick. So again, they re-released this a couple of years later because this was successful and it was an easy thing for them to put back out and knew that they had a winner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of takes us into our second movie, because this, again, to me, was another one that was just talked about so much that I didn't know anything about this movie back in the mid 2000s, but it was talked about so much as like one of the most wanted movies to get a physical media release. And everybody's like, where is it? There's less of those movies now because we've gotten so much. There's a couple big ones I still think of all the time, but back then there was a lot, like Video Dead. Like, I mean, there was so many that people talked about on a regular basis. That's like, where is this? Why haven't we gotten this yet? And the next one was Night of the Creeps, which again, we go back to, it's kind of linked to Monster Squad. So it's interesting that these two movies were both kind of lost forever. And this movie came out in 1986, but it was talked about so much that when I went to one of my conventions early on, I had found this bootleg, which is a real, actually high-end bootleg for the time. And it says on it like high def transfer. It's got this cool alternate art with the hand coming through. And I had this for a very long time. And this was actually the first time I'd ever seen Night of the Creeps, was when I picked this up at an early convention that I had, which is maybe, I don't know, 06 maybe or something like that. But I snagged this up. Inside it comes with, this disc here, and then it comes with a second disc that says Night of the Creeps cable TV cut. Now, I don't know a lot about that.
I miss stuff like that though. That's
right,
convention exclusive stuff for sure.
100%. And this was my first introduction to Night of the Creeps. And man, when I put this in for the first time to kind of see what all the hype was about, I fell so in love with this movie. It was one of those times where, which don't happen a lot, you put something in from like the 80s or back in the day that you'd never seen, and you were completely blown away by it. Like, I'm like, this is everything I love in horror. The campiness, the fun, the practical effects. I mean, it was Tom Atkins' role in here is just unbelievable. Like, I mean, it felt like a teen comedy with horror mixed in. It was just everything I wanted, and it became an all-time favorite of mine just straight up from this. So of course, then I became on board. Like, we need an official release of this movie, and I was hyping it up just like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bootlegs, this was heavily bootlegged, Night of the Creeps for many years. And this one, like you mentioned earlier, nothing until 2009. I think it was like the summer of 2009. We got this finally on not only DVD and Blu ray, but multiple different versions, and we'll talk about it. I mean,
Hmm.
it was kind of a weird promotion, and we did hardcore digging to find all this stuff. This was not readily available on Google, believe it or not. But big deal back in the day, and you mentioned that it was an HD transfer on that bootleg of yours. Do you remember Monsters HD?
I don't.
That was way ahead of its time. We're talking, I don't even know when HD became a thing. This is before Blu-rays and everything. This is when you had HD like on your cable system, like DirecTV or whatever. And they would play HD versions of a lot of these movies, and a lot of which it was many years later before they finally hit an official
Hmm.
physical release. So a lot of the times, like Night of the Creeps was one of those. I think The Gate was another one. Blood Diner, I think, was on there in HD back in the day. We're talking 2004, 2005
I'm
when
thinking
this.
Video Dead had to be on it because I had the exact same edition of this, but
Yeah,
Video Dead. Like it had the same strip at the bottom. It almost looked like it was part of a collection. So I'm assuming that was probably where they got these transfers from back then.
yeah. I never had that service because we're here in Eastern Kentucky. We don't get stuff like
I
that.
never had it either.
But yeah, way ahead of its time, man. We're talking, like I said, 2004, 2005 era. And it's crazy because it was like 2009 finally. I mean, Sony didn't even release this thing on DVD until then. This was a
Well,
DVD and Blu-ray debut.
so that's what I wanted to kind of talk about because again, we have a connection between Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps with Decker, right? So there's that connection there. Number one, number two, they're both movies from the 80s, and they're both lost films, basically, and basically wanted heavily by the fans. We finally got Monster Squad, and everybody was excited. Then this started to kind of get the rumblings. Now, what's crazy to me about this is okay, Lionsgate was doing a line, they did the gate, they did all this stuff. Monster Squad got out, but like you said, you had people like Felcher helping working on this, getting the features going. This was a huge thing for Lionsgate, but Lionsgate at the time was known for horror. Right? They were really making their name in the horror genre. For me, what blows my mind is that Sony gave enough shit about this movie that nobody else seemed to care about until the rumblings became a big thing of like, where's Night of the Creeps? And I just don't see like these big companies digging deep and finding these more obscure horror movies and being like, you know what, we're going to finally put these out for the fans. And I know you kind of have an idea of like how this ended up coming to be, and Sony saying, you know what, let's release Night of the Creeps and let's do it a little bit special, which I think is just a weird thing in itself to think about that Sony would actually give that much shits about a movie like this.
Yeah, the landscape in 2009 was way different than it is now. Would that ever happen now? Probably not. But back then, I mean, from what I was told, they looked at the success of that Monster Squad release, which was a gigantic seller for Lionsgate. And they knew all along that they had the rights for Night of the Creeps. And I think that it was just more or less, an online thing. They were seeing everybody was demanding it and all that. They got Felcher involved with the special features on Night of the Creeps as well. And it all kind of came together. But like I said, when I was mentioning the landscape changes, they were selling 10 to 20 times more than what they're selling of physical media now. So these releases, like I remember distinctly seeing Night of the Creeps in Walmart and being like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
wow, what a moment, man. Because
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about a movie that, again, was very, very difficult to track down in any form. And much like the VHS of Monster Squad, the Night of the Creeps was going for big money as well. So you had to pony up some money to even get the VHS tape. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, just one day in Walmart, there it was. It was sitting on the
and
shelf, $20
another
or whatever.
it is crazy. You had Monster Squad, you had you had Night of the Creeps both on the shelf at Walmart around Halloween or whatever. But yeah, it was insane to see because again, like you said, these are at retail stores, and this was a movie that a couple of years earlier a lot of people didn't know, and this really gained this movie a lot of popularity in the horror genre. And even with me, like I knew it from this bootleg, but like the hype that this thing started to get. My friends were buying this thing. They were falling in love with the movie. They started doing reunions for this movie at conventions because now more people were familiar with these people. But I want to go back to Sony and like what they did with this, because when we decided to do this show and I reached out to you about it, and I knew that these two editions were so important in the day of DVD and horror back in the day, the big thing that stood out to me was not only the amazing edition with the slipcover that we got from Monster Squad, but it was this Night of the Creeps release because they did something here that not many people do. And it's actually kind of funny to see now with like what Slippy's doing with Trick or Treat. And he's doing like, hey, you were doing 3 different versions of this movie with the outer box, and you get to pick the one you want and whatever. But they'll all be available, but you can pick it. And to be honest, this was something that they did, Sony's did. And I said something to you, and like you said, we dug to find this because we both knew exactly what we were talking about, but to try to come up with this image and to figure this out was hard, man. And what it was you said it was Amazon. I don't remember that, but there was news out there and says Night of the Creeps is coming from Sony, and they want you to pick the artwork for the upcoming DVD. Wild. Now, how we picked it, I don't remember if you went on their site and sent in, like you clicked A, B, or C and then just sent it. I don't remember how that went.
Well, from what I read, it was a poll that was actually on Amazon, and it had all 3 of the covers up there, and you could vote.
So as you can kind of see here, this is the images that we were given. It said, hey, here's going to be we want one of the 3 to be the DVD cover, and you had to choose. And to be honest, man, I don't remember what I chose. I feel like I would have chose number 1. I think. I don't remember, but do you have any idea which one you would have chosen back then?
Probably number 1, but honestly, like none of them are really that good.
No, not at all. Not considering the poster arts that this movie had. I mean, even just that one I showed you with the hand, that's a great art. The artwork of them with the flamethrowers, that was a poster, was a great art. You and I have a one sheet of the boyfriend at the door which is another amazing artwork. So it's like there was so much cool art for this movie, and they chose this, which again, maybe their mindset was shit. Monster Squad, Gate, all this stuff that's doing big money over Lionsgate. They did all this new artwork to try to, sell to maybe more kids and people that are just going to be walking down the aisle checking something out, and maybe they thought those other ones were just a little bit too 80s.
Probably. I mean, you got to think back then, like the retro thing wasn't a big deal at this point. But yeah, they were trying to, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know what they were trying with that middle one. That's what I always call the mustard and ketchup cut or whatever. But like at least the other ones look a little more modern, maybe, or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, just my opinion, that the cover art for this kind of hurt the release. I don't think as many people were like that intrigued, but especially like I said, they ended up picking that mustard and ketchup cover there in the middle.
Yeah, that was the one that supposedly won. And what's interesting too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the dude in the middle there, like this was kind of like his big break. Was he ever like featured like before this on anything else, or is this kind of like, why is he the guy that's like front and center of like these covers? Like, I don't think he was on any of the other posters. No.
They must have had like some sort of production still that was really good quality that they could use. I don't know.
This guy was the best zombie on this.
You said you met that guy at a convention or something?
Yeah. So after this release came out, I went to Monster Mania and they did like this big Night of the Creeps reunion. So like a lot of the cast was there. He was there. And at the time the DVD was out. So of course he's selling a bunch of these things. And, it's just funny to look at these. Like the one to me that's the most foreign is obviously the red one, because that I've never seen that again in my life. But the blue one is kind of what we got with the Blu-ray, but a little bit different, right? Like it was almost like not that one, but like a
The
kind
same
of a
kind of
carbon
theme. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it was one of those things where how cool and how different was it that Sony, gave the fans the choice for this movie? Like it was unnecessary, but at the same time it made it more exciting, right? Even though those images weren't great, but you felt like you had a little bit of pull as a fan. And they were giving this thing a little bit extra treatment because it does have a lot of features on here as well. And this was just as great of addition, I think, as Monster Squad. It was just one of those things that I don't think it sold as well, but it definitely gave this thing a new life.
I think it did okay. I know that they had, and I was talking to Felcher about this because he would remember more than me. Because there's another edition of this that we both have that I think is pretty rare. It has to be pretty rare.
So I did find the yellow. So I got the ketchup and mustard. This was the original one. This is the one that you would see at Walmart, Best Buy. This was the one. This is the one that won the contest. It's blue on the side, Thrill Me on the back, and like you said, there was something that we both had, and we didn't realize we both had it because I thought I was going to come on this show and like surprise the shit out of you with this.
Well,
that's what I thought.
To be fair, I don't think a lot of people watching this video even knows what this is because it's so limited. And I tried searching, and Felcher was my only bit of information on this. So the story goes, the summer of 2009, they were getting ready to release Night of the Creeps, or maybe they had just released it. I can't remember. And as an exclusive for the San Diego Comic-Con, they had, if you purchased a copy of the DVD or whatever it was, you got an exclusive slipcover and even autographs. I think this one's signed by Jason Lively, who played Chris in the movie. And then, like, it even says on the back, limited edition DVD sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows how limited it is, man?
Now, where did you get that exactly?
I am not sure. Felcher may have sent it. Now, I have no idea. Somebody from the show may have sent it to me back in the day. But maybe Felcher sent it. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's one of those deals where I don't know. But I did confirm with Felcher it was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. But it's not where you picked up your copy, right?
So, and it's funny because mine has a blue case. Now, I don't know if that was an accident or whatever, but so I was going to bring this on the show thinking I was going to blow your mind because this is kind of like one of the other variant artworks that didn't make it, right? Like there's a little bit of change. Like obviously they took the same concept, but they changed a little bit up, but it almost is like this would have been one of the other ones chosen. So to me, I'm thinking this must have came in second place or something that they would have actually made.
It's kind of weird because it's the Blu-ray art,
right?
Really.
So that's another thing that's weird too. And I got mine at that Night of the Creeps reunion at Monster Mania. They had them there. So like you said, maybe they had leftovers. Maybe the cast each had a little stack.
What does the disc look like? Because I don't have a disc with mine.
I don't have a disc in mine. Mine's empty.
Okay.
So, but it's signed on the back by Tom Atkins, and yours is signed by someone else, right?
Jason Lively signed mine, yeah.
Okay, this one says, "Give me my shotgun," Tom Atkins. And like you said, the Blu-ray, which I think came out at the exact same time as the DVD, I believe.
Yeah.
And it had that same artwork there on it. Now, this is just the Blu-ray as well. So I made sure I grabbed, both of them at the time. So
and we were talking about this before. I have no shortage of Fred Decker autographs, dude. So mine is signed by Fred Decker, and I got this at Dark Delicacies. I think it's like a producer or something. I don't know.
Oh, Dallas, they used to do a lot of cool shit. I used to go a lot. Yeah. I didn't go, but I would get them online. And I think what we also talked about too is when this was released, this was almost re-released, right? So it kind of all fell together for the Blu-ray and stuff. So the Monster Squad Blu-ray, I believe, came out around the same time Creeps was released. So again, you had more Decker, and people were, you take Creeps, you take Monster Squad, and people were going crazy for it. You look at this image behind us, And this was a poster that was done around this time. It said Night of the Creeps versus Monster Squad. Like,
Mhm.
artists were involved here. I think this was Jason's work. And we both have this poster, which this poster is going for buco bucks online. Very
Ooh.
limited, very rare, signed by Fred Decker. It's a beautiful print. But again,
Mhm.
you're going back to the whole connection between Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps that only really started happening around this late 2000s, is because the release of the DVDs, the Blu-rays, now people are talking about Monster Squad more. People are talking about Night of the Creeps more than ever. And then you're starting to get like merch and artwork, and Fright Rags are doing shirts and stuff like that. So it was just a really interesting time in the horror genre. And, not many people were collecting hard back then or in the mix to know that there's pretty cool backstories with these two releases as well.
Yeah, I mean these two movies will always be connected. Fred Decker's career, very interesting, career. Unfortunately, it ended for him, I think, way too soon. He was a very young man when he made both of these movies, and I think it was RoboCop 3 ended up being his final directorial movie, and that's back in the early 90s, which sucks. I mean, he's doing other things in Hollywood, I think, but I think the guy had unreal natural talent.
Mm-hmm.
You can't teach that. That's what somebody said. And it's sad because, like, he was what, in his 20s, I think, when he made both of these movies. Insane. That is insane.
Yeah, he has a good filmography for somebody who didn't do too much. And, a lot of his stuff is just he knew how to bring horror and comedy and kind of make it work. And that's what I really appreciate from him. His films were always, there was always a fun factor to them, and they always looked great. Like the style and stuff, very stylistic in some of the stuff he did. And I appreciate that. And man, what's crazy is the collectors that we were begging and pleading for Night of the Creeps and the Monster Squad to finally hit physical media, and we finally got it, and it was just like the coolest shit. Now these movies are so readily available, they're getting re-released all the time, right? Like, I can't even tell you now how many people have done Monster Squad since
Oh
this
yeah.
came out. And it's cool to see that it's still getting love. Like when that 4K was announced, I mean, everybody was going nuts for it. And Night of the Creeps, the same thing. That's the new thing now, is people are like, oh my God, I think Scream Factory's doing Night of the Creeps 4K. Like, I can't wait. And they did a beautiful Blu-ray as well. Like, I mean, the
Mhm.
artwork for that was great. They actually had a promotion where they were giving you like a secondary slip cover. This was before that was a normal thing.
I have that actually.
But
It's one of the rare ones that I have.
it's a great looking set, man. It really is. And, you know, it's still getting that love. And I think especially Creeps did not get that love until we saw this thing for the first time. And now it's a staple in all horror collections.
For sure. No doubt. I mean, it introduced thousands and thousands of new faces to the movie, and continues to grow still to this day. So it's very cool that still in 2024, movies from the mid 80s are still being discovered by the youngsters out there and everything. And, hopefully they'll do some more digging, because there's more great stuff that still needs to be discovered, I think.
100% there is. I mean, there's not as much, but there's some real good ones that I would love to see finally get its due, and become a little bit more of a fan favorite that we know it is, but nobody really knows. And it was such a fun time to rediscover these movies and to see these movies that maybe we loved and thought we were some of the only people that were really digging these, to all of a sudden everybody be into it. It was a cool feeling, and I'm hoping that we get more of that, because there's a lot less, and we just I feel like we keep treading the same water, and it's exciting when we get that something new. And having you on here to talk about this was huge, because again, it's another time in physical media, and the horror physical media, that I feel like was an important part of this. Because when you look at these two releases, I do think that these ultimately were some precursors to what we're seeing now, right? Like the loaded special features. I mean, the slip covers, the idea of them saying, hey, pick which artwork you want. Like it was more for the collector than just like the average person. And then it became more once it kind of hit store shelves. But I love going back in time, and talking about this stuff. And I love collecting this stuff because I think, again, that these hold a special place in horror physical media history. And I definitely want to keep this in my collection because it's just an important time for me as a collector. And, you know, the memories are still there. And that's why we just spent 40 minutes talking about the release of 2 movies. So very, very cool. And I hope to come up with new ideas and look at my collection and be like, this would be a perfect thing to talk about because it's so fun to sit back and go back down memory lane and just focusing on all the new stuff that's coming. It's cool to bring people back and talk about these stories.
That reminds me, though, that I do a little cheap plug here because I just thought of this. If you want to go back to see how excited me and Uncle Bill were for the Monster Squad when it came out on DVD, just search for our old school Monster Squad review from like 15 years ago or whatever. Go on YouTube, search for it. You can get a sense of the excitement that was in the air when this movie was finally coming out on DVD. But don't watch it at work or anything.
All right, I will link that at the end of this video for you guys to go check out. And I'll put the link in the description as well because I don't remember it offhand. I mean, I was watching you guys at the time or listening to you guys at the time, but I don't remember it. So I'd love to go back and listen to it after we talked about it. And guys, again, if you're you know, physical media historians in horror and you want to add these things to your collection, these are the 2 DVDs that I would recommend you guys tracking down and getting.
You can probably get those pretty cheap.
Oh, for sure. The only thing I'm thinking is maybe Monster Squad. You might not be able to get the slip really cheap with it, but the disc itself and you know, Creeps, I think you can probably still get pretty available on eBay or whatever. But man, thank you again for hanging out tonight. You can let them know where to find you. They know where to find you. Where are they finding you, Wes?
DEADPIT.com.
DEADPIT.com. Thank you guys for checking this out. This is Garrett at Born to Be Rad. And like always, stay